friends, frenemies, and those who just sit around to throw eggs at the speakers. Welcome to Real Progressives. This is Steve Grumbine, and tonight I'm bringing Ellis back, a very, very, very special edition of Ellis Winningham joining us because we've got a lot of confusion about priorities that are going on right now in our country as our various parties and so forth look at the health care bill, and they look at, the environment, and they look at, people suffering, people out of work, people underemployed, people not being able to provide for their families, people struggling, people really, quite frankly, suicidal, despairing, etc. And here we are. We've got a situation where we tell you day in and day out about the power of what our monetary sovereignty can do for our nation and what it can do, in fact, for you and I and all the issues that matter to us. Yet still it persists, this freakish, almost ridiculous fetish. If it's not gold fetish, then it's an end the Fed fetish. If it's not an end the Fed fetish, it's some other bullshit fetish that sidetracks us from solving the pain that we suffer from today. And it really, 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 if you believe in climate change, if you believe in environmental destruction, if you believe we're at an event horizon, we don't have time for your bullshit. We don't. We just don't. So tonight we are going to talk about the Federal Reserve. So without further ado, let me bring on my friend Ellis Winningham. How are you tonight, sir?
Not too bad, are you?
I'm doing good, man. So talk to me. What is the Federal Reserve? Just break it down.
The Federal Reserve is the nation's central bank. It's no different than its operational aspects. It's no different than the RBA in Australia or the Bank of England, Bank of Canada, Bank of Japan. It's the nation's central bank. And the Federal Reserve has both public and private characteristics. I hate using the word private because it's more or less commercial. There's a public service mission, shall we say. And basically the purpose of the central bank, the nation's central bank, is to conduct monetary policy and to assist in ensuring that fiscal policy works. It doesn't conduct fiscal policy, it conducts monetary policy. And it's where a lot of people get hung up. But
well, hold on, having a conversation here, let's define quickly, what is the difference between fiscal policy, in other words, I guess creating new net financial assets,
Right.
spending new money into the economy, versus monetary policy, which is shifting it around and managing interest rates, et cetera? I mean, what are we talking about here?
yeah, what we're talking about is fiscal policy is the realm of Congress. It belongs to Congress. And what fiscal policy does is it adds dollars to the economy. And if it's Australia that we're talking about, then fiscal policy adds Australian dollars to the economy, and it destroys dollars through taxation. Okay, so in the US, Congress has total control over fiscal policy. Okay, Congress decides on a budget, they decide how much they're going to spend, and then they manufacture the dollars when that budget is decided upon. Treasury is then ordered to begin crediting the accounts with these new dollars, and the Federal Reserve just stands by to ensure that the payment's clear. Okay, in other words, the reserves are injected into high-powered money and everything's fine and dandy. That's not monetary policy. Fiscal policy results in net financial assets. And when we say that, what we mean is a dollar is a net financial asset, meaning it's net. It can be saved. You can save it. So if the government gives you a dollar, you can save it, unlike a bank loan, where you'd have to pay that back. Well, only the US government can create net financial assets, okay? Not private banks, as they like to say in the literature. Private banks, commercial banks is what they mean. Commercial banks like JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, they can't create net financial assets. Only the government can. And so this is a big clues to the function of the Federal Reserve.
Well, we had some very well-meaning people run around saying, I think there's something called Inspire Bank Exits, who took some people up to New York City and they went to tell the UN that, damn it, the United States is bankrupt and the Federal Reserve is private. In 1934, the United States went belly up. We've got so many myths out there, so many legends, so many crazy stories that derail us from progress, Ellis. What is it that we need to know as we go into this stuff? Because I had somebody who's a dear friend, practically apoplectic. It's a private entity. We've got to end it. And we had somebody else throwing another article at me. It's a private entity. We've got to end it. And
Why?
I'm like, guys. Go ahead, Ellis. Please.
No, I mean, why?
Because
why. The why is because your friend, and I don't care what anybody says, this is the truth. Everybody thinks that monetary policy is fiscal policy. They think that monetary policy, you'll notice how they say the Fed is independent. You notice how they say that all the time.
Hold on. Somebody said the function of the Fed is not to create financial assets. It's to set and maintain the value of their currency. See.
Okay. Well, anyway, as I was okay. So anyway, back to reality. The Federal Reserve is a creature of Congress. Okay. It cannot tell Congress no when Congress wants to spend because the Federal Reserve doesn't control fiscal policy. It only said, if tomorrow Congress said, I wish to give Steve Grumbine $12 million, Treasury would then go into Steve's account, credit that account with $12 million, and all the Federal Reserve can do is say, yes, sir. That's it. It can't stop it, nor can the Federal Reserve say, well, I don't know, Congress, you have a lot of debt outstanding that you already owe us. I don't know, we can't let you have any more dollars. Okay, and the problem is, as I was saying earlier before this guy commented, the problem is that people think monetary policy is fiscal policy, okay? So they think that when the Federal Reserve gets a wild hair up its ass, it can just start injecting dollars into the economy and give them to Steve Grumbine or give them to Richard Poor, but instead they just give them all to Wall Street and they all go sit on a yacht. That's not what monetary policy is. Monetary policy is the setting of a particular target interest rate and then defending it. In other words, it's setting the price of bank lending. Bank lending is not dollar creation. Bank lending is a private activity where banks leverage actual US dollars in order to profit. And how they do that is they lend. Okay? So, yes, the Federal Reserve is independent when it comes to monetary policy. You know, what's the problem with that? It's not adding anything new net. It's not adding net financial assets. Okay? It's simply dealing with bank lending and setting rates. Okay? And yes, there can be corruption there. Like whenever the Fed raises an interest rate, raises baseline interest rate, what it's really doing is it's just increasing Wall Street's basic income guarantee. Okay, but that's not fiscal policy. What that means is that it's raising the price of lending. So basically, you know, things become more expensive. People pay higher interest rates, so banks get more profit. What's so hard to understand about this? But none of this has to do with dollar creation. When it comes to dollar creation, you need Congress to act. And when it does, the Fed simply cannot tell Congress no, because the Fed is not private in the sense that it controls the U.S. currency, it controls and owns the U.S. dollar and lends it to the government. Okay, it just doesn't work that way. Even if it were a private, completely private entity, it still wouldn't work that way because it could not tell Congress no. Because what Congress could easily do, if this were a true private entity and it had the government at its needs, all Congress would have to say is, well, from now on, we no longer accept Federal Reserve notes in payment of taxes. What's the Federal Reserve going to do now? Nothing. It can't do anything. Go broke. Because it can't, you know, Congress could just shut the Fed down like that. I will no longer collect Federal Reserve notes for taxes. Sorry, they're not acceptable. Treasury is going to issue greenbacks. The Federal Reserve's out of business, okay? Another thing that I want to mention, Steve, to all these, oh, it's a private bank thing. If this is a private bank that controls its money, is that what that guy said? It's its money, deals with its money. If this were the private Federal Reserve's money and the government was beholden to the Federal Reserve and we're all at its knees, why doesn't the Federal Reserve just print enough money of its own money in Federal Reserve notes or whatever and give it all to its friends, all the money they'll ever need forever and ever, and just go off and be rich and sit on an island? Why, if they have an infinite supply of their own money, why do they feel they need to lend it to the government? Why? What's the purpose of that? Why not just print the money and walk, you know? Why do you need a government? Screw it. Just print up all the money and take off. It doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't make any sense. It's silly.
So Rohan, when Rohan was on a few weeks back, he had talked about how all the different banks had different size pieces of paper, different coupons, different IOUs, and all this stuff. Somebody asked, well, what happened before this? Bottom line is everybody had all these different tokens and they had to go and exchange. Some banks had more worthiness. Some banks didn't have more worthiness. And you were getting shortchanged left, right, and center. Nobody could agree upon a medium of exchange. Set the bar flat, even. Now we have a currency that we across the nation can use and leverage to our purpose. And Ellis, to go back to what you were saying, you had said, quite frankly, that monetary policy does X. Fiscal policy creates new dollars. So when we look at why the suffering is occurring at the lowest levels, it's not the Federal Reserve doing it. The Federal Reserve is doing what it does. It is our fiscal policy, our Congress. I don't care if it's 11% approval rating or not. We're not getting rid of Congress. We're not getting rid of the presidency. We're not blowing up the IRS. We're not blowing up all these things. Bottom line is that this is fiscal policy. I almost dropped an F-bomb there. Fiscal policy is spending on the it's spending, period. It's when you spend on the military.
Monetary policy is not security. Monetary policy is not government spending. Monetary policy is not spending at all. That's not what it is. Okay? It's just setting the price of bank credit. That's it.
My God. So this Sunday night, we're going to speak to the dullard community that likes gold. So don't worry about it. We're not touching gold tonight.
I don't want to touch gold. I'll smash that on Sunday.
Yeah, we'll deal with the people that like to bite on their coins.
They can bite on all they want. There's not enough gold in the world for production.
I'll give them something to bite on.
But Rohan's correct. What he was talking about is clearing on par. Exactly. What that basically means is that Chase, let's just assume it's the 1800s or whatever, and there's a bank called Chase, and then there's Bank of America. Okay, a Chase buck created by the Bank of Chase, okay, might not be worth the same amount to the Bank of America. So, you know, and if one bank goes bust and you have like 40,000, say Chase went bust and you have 40,000 Chase bucks, well, you have no money. And they're not exchangeable. There's no good. Well, here's the deal. When the Federal Reserve is there, the central bank is there. All right. What this allows is that for one Chase buck to equal one Bank America buck at all times, because it clears on par with the dollar. See that? Because what's up in those reserve accounts? HPM, US dollars, you know. So
HPM. So the people know what HPM is because they don't know how to differentiate. They do not know how to differentiate between paper dollars and the freaking digital dollars that exist in the back end. They have no idea when you say HPM because they sit there and think that because there's more paper dollars floating around, somehow or another somebody created money. Go ahead.
No, it's got nothing to do with paper dollars. HPM is high-powered money. It's a US dollar. Okay. And the US dollar takes three forms. There's three. It comes in cash and coin. And then you have cash and coin, you have numbers in reserve accounts and numbers in securities accounts. You know, the securities accounts are what we call treasury bonds. Okay, that's just a dollar that pays interest, right? But government spending is not cash dependent anymore. When the federal government spends, it doesn't need cash. It doesn't turn on printing presses and create a bunch of cash and then ship it off to to buy things and to pay for things. So if the government wants to fund the military, it doesn't call the Federal Reserve and say we need more cash, and then the Federal Reserve calls the Treasury and says, oh, print off about $1.5 trillion in paper cash so the government can send an armored car to the various military contractors and pay for services rendered. It's just not the way it works. Cash is based on bank customer demand for the product. Okay, that's it. Has nothing to do with government spending. All it is the physical manifestation of a number that used to sit in a reserve account. Okay. Get it? Okay. It's just US dollars are a bunch of numbers on a spreadsheet. Okay. You need to get past 1930s and the 20s and the 1910s. Okay?
Why do you think people like that era so much? Why do you think they harken back to an era where, you know, people were really, really struggling mightily and had a really, really horrible life because of bank runs and freaking complete and utter depression based on gold standard bullshit? Why do you think they harken back to that garbage?
Because for some people, there's a few people out there that think the dollar is a commodity. Okay, it's something rare that you find in the earth. Okay, so the US dollar is a rare commodity that was there when the earth formed billions of years ago, but it can only be found within the borders of the United States. Isn't that clever? Okay, but and so they think that their money needs to have value, like intrinsic value. Food having intrinsic value doesn't matter. Okay, medicines that have they shouldn't have intrinsic value. That doesn't matter. You know, cars having intrinsic value, it doesn't matter. What matters is that your dollars have intrinsic value.
But Ellis, what happened now that the Fed's there? We can spend beyond our means, Ellis.
The Fed hasn't got anything to do with that.
I know, but this is what we're dealing with out there, man. We're dealing with people that truly just despise progress.
You see, here's the thing. Now that you mentioned that, people that despise progress. I posted something just a few minutes ago after I finished dinner, before I went and got ready for this broadcast. And it was about some types of progressives who prefer the struggle to the solution, you know, where they like to collect. I said it this way. They like to collect political issues. Like a coin collection, you know what I mean? Over here, you have to see it. Over here is climate change. It's in mint condition. And over here is racial tensions. And I love universal health care. That's my favorite issue. And you say, wait, what are you doing? You collect political issues? Oh, yes. Well, wouldn't you rather get rid of them by solving them? Oh, no, they're too precious to me. You know what I'm talking about, those people? Oh, yes. They prefer to have something to bitch about. Okay, so they would rather struggle endlessly with the fist in the air than actually solve anything, because if they were to solve anything, it would make their life meaningless. It gives them a way to justify their hobby in politics. They love politics, and this gives them I get to struggle and fight. And this is a totally useless thing. So you approach someone with, oh my God, the Fed's private. Oh my God, the Fed's private. Oh no. Well, let's end the Fed. There's a new issue. I can add that to my collection. How many, but you see, the thing is that what's the real issue? These are issues that are handed down from think tanks. Let me tell you right now I'm going to tell you right now the main issue here, okay, is people starving. The main issue is lack of health care. The main issue is homelessness. The main issue is all of these things. The main issue is not end the Fed. The main issue is not racial tension, because they're all wrapped up in economics. You have to solve the economic problem first.
Why do you suppose people would, in any way, shape, or form, get sucked into conspiracies and things like that, rather than actually focus?
Drama.
Is that really all it is? Because I honestly, anybody, they can't explain what they're solving. They really can't, and it's infuriating, because I know that I'm looking for, like you said, single payer. Mm-hmm. I'm looking to fix the environment, because it won't matter whether the Fed's public or private if we're all dead because we can't breathe or drink clean water. Right. But yet these morons will go after that. And so here we are sitting there with a situation where we could literally solve these problems today, mm-hmm. but instead we've got these friggin' ankle biters, these fleas that leave you marked up on your calves and shins and your ankles, that absolutely stand in the way of progress.
What I'm saying is they're not interested in solving the problem. They're not interested in that as much as they are the struggle and collecting issues. Now you got a new issue. Look, you've got all these political issues that have been handed down so far. You've got racial tensions, you've got gun violence, you've got homelessness, you've got universal health care, you've got climate change, you've got all these problems. Let's add another one. Okay, end the Fed. Okay, that's great. The Fed's a private bank. We've got to end the Fed before we can do anything. Isn't that interesting? Before we can do anything. We've got to tax the rich before we can do anything. We've got to have a class war before we can do anything. What you're basically telling me is you like to collect issues and you like to keep them alive as long as possible to give your life meaning. You're not interested in any solutions. You just like to struggle and struggle because it allows you to get in front of the camera and become famous, or it allows you to become a leader, or it allows you to get on social media and have people look up to you, or it allows people in the coffee room to think you're really smart. Okay, I'm done with that bullshit. The fact is, the biggest issue, the greatest issue is not end the Fed. It's a little child that's starving. The greatest issue is not end the Fed. It's people that are being bombed to death for no reason in foreign countries for what? Nothing. It's not end the Fed. That's not the main issue. The main issue is homelessness in sub-zero weather. It has to be dealt with. These are the real issues. No one talks about them because we've got to talk about the Fed.
Let me ask you a question. It sounds to me like the idea of seeing people starving, it sounds like the idea of watching these bomb videos where people are laying there dead and mutilated. Mm-hmm. It sounds like watching people struggle without health care provides them with fodder to point to and to do these things, and it's like it gives them the struggle to keep going and going and going instead of actually solving them. So they can have these pictures. Oh, look at these horrible bombings. Look at this, end the Fed. Look at these horrible things. Look at this over here, end the Fed. Look at, oh my God, single parent. I can't afford to get my teeth fixed. End the Fed. Horrible, horrible, horrible people.
You see the comments that's going up about the Fed. Oh, that's a joke. It doesn't get audited. Yes, it does. But here's the thing. They want a deep audit. Once again, this is a person who doesn't seem to understand the difference between fiscal policy and monetary policy. Has no idea what he's talking about.
Do that in layman's terms. Go through fiscal policy versus monetary policy. So it's like literally child-proof.
Okay, you got a dog. Okay, I'm gonna let it shit on your living room floor. Now, there's dog shit on your living room floor where before there wasn't. New dog shit. Dog deposited some dog shit on your floor. Now, you want to do monetary policy? Go grab a knife, cut the dog shit into 4 squares, and move it around the house. That's monetary policy. Okay. It doesn't change the amount of net financial assets. It doesn't add or subtract net financial assets that fiscal policy put there. It just moves shit around. In addition to the fact that it increases bank lending, decreases bank lending because it sets the price of bank lending. And since banks don't lend out reserves, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. And this guy says we are going to talk ourselves right into extinction. Isn't that interesting? We're going to talk ourselves right into extinction. Could you please explain to me, since we're going to talk ourselves into extinction, what citadel, please, did we have to charge and bring down before we could pay for a 10-year war in Afghanistan? Are you saying that the Fed created the money for that? It had nothing to do with Congress? Here's why people say this. People like that. Ready for this, Steve? I'm going to say it. I'm done with this shit. This guy has spent his life, or whatever his adult life, whenever he voted, voting for numbnuts and lame brains in Congress. Okay, and he doesn't want to take the responsibility for that. He doesn't want to blame Congress for the mess we're in, because that would mean he has to blame himself for being dumb enough to believe these idiots. Okay, so therefore, we just point the finger at an unelected thing. You know, oh, the Fed. Oh, well, it's private. There's the problem right there. That way, I don't have to blame myself. Now, you're to blame. I'm to blame. Steve's to blame. Everybody's to blame. Aaron's to blame. If you've ever casted a vote for a Republican or Democrat, it's your fault. Your fault. There is corruption. Bad news. Got some bad news. There's corruption with the Board of Governors, the Federal Reserve. I've got some other bad news for you, too. The Board of Governors is an actual agency of the US government. There's no way around that, okay? But you know there's corruption. There's corruption, you know that? But you know what? We don't elect the Board of Governors. The president appoints, and the US Senate, the president appoints, okay, people to the board, and the Senate confirms them. Well, Steve Grumbine votes for president. Steve Grumbine votes for the Senate. Guess what? Steve Grumbine is at fault for the corruption at the Federal Reserve. If you want to see a decent person who knows financial markets, okay, like Scott Fulwiler as chairman, okay, of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. If you want to see that, you can't have a neoliberal president. You're going to put Scott in there. All right, so you're just going to get neoliberalism. Is all you're going to get. You're going to get a reliance.
Going backwards. You and I have talked about this before. This is the ridiculousness. I'm going to cut my leg off because it might do something bad over here. There's a yin and the yang to everything. Everything has a possible. You have corruption in the White House. You have greatness in the White House. You have corruption in Congress. You have greatness in the You have corruption at the Federal Reserve. You have greatness there. Bottom line is that what we use these things for is up to us. They're saying, well, if you couldn't deficit spend, then the military couldn't exist. But neither could NASA, and neither could the ability to solve our environmental problems. Neither could the ability to solve diseases. Neither could the ability to do just about anything. And unfortunately, we're stuck. These are the people we got to live with in the society that would literally hold us back from being able to solve diseases and everything else because it might be used badly.
But see, this is the thing I'm talking about. The reason why people think these things is because they have no idea what monetary policy is. Okay, we've been relying on monetary policy to manage the economy now for a long damn time. Okay, fiscal policy has been shunned for 40 years. Oh, stop that! You got to stop that. No fiscal policy. And you get these young people who think that the Fed is actually funding the economy by conducting monetary policy. That's not how it works. Congress funds it by creating actual US dollars, okay, with fiscal policy. This needs to be understood. Treasury then goes and credits an account. The Federal Reserve ensures that those payments clear. That's it. It's a big bank that's owned by the government in this sense. Now watch what happens. Over here, suddenly, you flip to monetary policy. The Fed's independent with monetary policy. This is bank lending we're talking about, okay? You notice we fund war and the military machine, okay, with fiscal policy. Notice that? Got nothing to do with the Fed. Nothing at all, okay? The reason why you think that the Fed is funding America is because we've spent years relying on ridiculous monetary policy, which is nothing more than a blunt instrument at best. It's useless. It's practically useless. You want to rely on bank loans to fuel everything? Hey, suit yourself if you like Paul Krugman's idea of how the economy should work. But the truth is fiscal policy is much more powerful. The reason why the Fed people can't realize this is because no one allows the government to use fiscal policy to its potential. We just keep slashing the deficit, slash the deficit, slash the deficit, rely on bank loans. If you're going to rely on bank loans, you have to rely on the Fed to set the target interest rate so it can set the price of bank lending. Does anybody understand this?
Oh my God.
Hello.
In other words, the more that we perpetuate this, the more we push our lives into the hands of private banks, the more we have to go into debt because these dingleberries sit there and want to end the Fed and cut spending and all this other bullshit. We end up having to go into private debt.
The politicians force you into it. We're not forced. Do you understand? We're not forced in the sense that we're forcing ourselves. It's the politicians that are doing it. It's neoliberalism that's doing it. It's saying slash the deficit, okay? If you're going to slash the deficit, we understand that the economy needs dollars in order to function, all right? Well, if the government's not going to deficit spend and add more dollars so that we can get unemployment rate down and get consumer spending up, the only thing that's left is you have to have an alternative to the US dollar that can be spent like a dollar and buy things. You know what I mean? And what is that? It's called a bank loan. Okay, it's a bank IOU. All right. So if you're going to flood the economy with private debt in order to sell production, you're going to get it progressively over a period of time, a more indebted populace. Okay, and eventually when they can't take any more debt, they're just going to stop spending and the whole thing will collapse into recession. Okay, and then naturally also the deficit will automatically rise and and beguile everybody in Congress. Why is the deficit going up? Automatic stabilizers, dipshit. People are unemployed, you know?
Okay, so keeping it real, there is a reason why over and over and over again across the world, everywhere we've ever been throughout history, they have dropped pegs. And people think if the gold, it could be the cotton standard, it could be the banana standard, it could be the junk sack standard. It doesn't freaking matter. It's always, whenever you have a peg, that's when you see freaking economies collapse. That's when you see nations go destitute. Like literally almost to a fault. You can look where the policy space has been eliminated and you are just seeing the suffering. And that's why people lose the peg. That's why people go back to a free floating exchange.
Yeah.
Damn it.
You can't, well, you know, it's kind of off topic of this, of the Federal Reserve, but, you know, a peg for a nation like the United States or a nation like, you know, the United Kingdom or Canada or Japan or Australia is insane. That's just stupid. I mean, why do you want to limit the supply of your own currency to the supply of some other currency or to a ridiculous commodity just because it gives it intrinsic value? It's just stupid. You know, it goes back to these old arguments of, oh, well, you know, the price of bread in 1950 was, you know, 5 cents or 10 cents. No, now it's $2.50. Yeah, but what was your paycheck in 1950? Okay? You don't think about that, do you? I didn't think so. So, you know, there's a lot of people like to come armed with a lot of TV watching experience, magazine reading experience, and a lot of listening to grandpa and grandma, you know, talk about the heady days of the 50s and the jukebox and the rockola, you know, and the price of bread and the price of tea in China, and come and tell you how the economy should work. That's brilliant. You don't know what the hell you're talking about. Yeah, I just spoke to an Austrian the other day. It was a ridiculous conversation. I asked him, how much do you think an iPad would cost in 1922? And he said $36. Let me tell you something. If I took an iPad back to 1922, very few people would have enough money to buy the fucker. If I took an F-15 Hornet back to 1609, or if I took an F-18 Hornet, excuse me, if I took an F-18 Hornet back to 1776, neither King George or America or Germany or France collectively would have enough money to buy that fucker. All right, it's $36. Sound like Rain Man there. What's the price of a candy bar? $36. Price of an iPad? $36.
Why do you think people literally want to bring about pain and suffering to the least able to survive? Why do you think their goal, and it's got to be a goal, because it is literally one-to-one. It is literally one-to-one. Why the hell they would? And here's the thing too. What happens if we run out a little bit of gold? What are we going to do to get some gold, Ellis? What did we used to do back in the day?
Well, if a nation would have a gold supply on hand, and then if it wanted to increase the amount of currency in circulation, it had to find more gold. It either had to dig it out of the ground, pan it out of streams, or get it through international trade.
Or go to war.
Or go to war, and, you know, but the thing being is that it's all inefficient because there's not enough gold in the world to deal with the entire population of the world and all the production capacity that the world. I mean, if we were on the gold standard and stayed on the gold standard, the iMac would not be here. The iPhone would not be here. We'd be so far behind because it's just not possible. And furthermore, it's stupid. It's a pointless endeavor.
But
it's just dumb.
Don't you remember how peaceful the country was in the 1860s? Don't you remember how peaceful it was? I mean, we were
1860s.
peace-loving, peace-loving folks during the Civil War. And I mean, what about, even before?
So when an item is finite, it increases in value. No, yeah, it does. But when an item is infinite, the value don't matter, especially if that thing is money. The US dollar is infinite for a reason, because it's fiat. Therefore, it allows the US government to ensure full employment by spending for it, right up to the real ability of the economy to produce goods and services that increase in value. Now, what were you saying, Steve?
No, it's just exactly. And so one more thing too, regarding the Federal Reserve, a lot of people talk about quantitative easing, and this is a big deal. Jill Stein tried to say we're going to quantitatively ease people out of their student loans, which, great that she got the subject going to get people thinking we can get rid of student loans, but not really the way it happens. Quantitative easing does something completely different. Can you talk about what QE3 or, all the different things that quantitative easing does?
Quantitative easing is just an asset swap for liquidity in reserves. A bank, the Federal Reserve will take some bonds off a bank's hand and inject and swap them for liquid HPM, just liquid reserves. But you got to understand those reserves don't leave the reserve account. They don't go anywhere. They just sit there. And what the Federal Reserve will do before it does QE is it will set the target interest rate at or near zero. Okay, that's because it's about to build up excess reserves. Understand that so far? Well, if it did not do that, if it just left the interest rate, the positive rate, if it just left the target interest rate positive, then what would happen is, if it did QE and did all these asset swaps and injected liquid reserves, there'd be competition in the federal funds market for these excess reserves. And that would drive the FFR rate down below the target rate. And so the Federal Reserve would have to go and undo QE. See, so it would be a pointless act. But what's interesting to note is, how does it undo QE? How does it deal with those excess reserves that are in the system driving the overnight rate down? What it does is it takes US Treasury bonds and it takes away the liquidity and replaces them with a bond. Takes away the reserves, replaces it with a bond. That stops the competition. So that's why the Federal Reserve sets the overnight rate at or the target rate at or near zero prior to doing QE. Then when it does QE, it simply takes an asset from a bank, puts it on its books, and swaps that for some liquid reserves, which just sit there. And if you don't believe me, go and have a look at excess reserves since the global financial crisis. They're just sitting there. They just sit there. They don't go anywhere because banks don't lend reserves. That's why QE is not inflationary. That's why QE doesn't expand bank lending, because banks don't lend reserves. It's not what they're there for. So, that's QE. QE is just an asset swap for liquidity. It could go and take a bunch of mortgage-backed securities, put them over here, and stick a bunch of dollars in reserve accounts at the bank. They're just going to sit there because the bank can't lend them out. So QE is a pretty much quack economics. It's just a pointless activity, really.
Okay. So, somebody else was trying to say, come on, guys, it's the basics. When you add money to the system, it makes inflation. Come on. I just went ahead and popped in John Harvey's Money Growth Does Not Cause Fricking Inflation. But
you mean another one of those Friedman?
Yes, exactly. It is infuriating. The lowbrow.
Okay. Let's finish that right now. You and I, Steve, will finish that right now. The problem, and we're not going to talk about the M times V equals P times Q. We're just going to state clearly what Friedman was all about. The reason why you believe that increasing the number of dollars circulating is instantaneously inflation is because Friedman wanted you to believe that most people just don't want any extra money. In fact, they hate money. They don't want any more. And so the Federal Reserve has to force people against their will to take more money. And I have never met anybody that has said, no, don't give me any more money, stop. I've never seen anything like that. But assuming that absurdity, what Friedman asks us to believe is that all of these people in America, they don't want any more money, and the Fed says, screw this, it puts a gun to their head. You know, it can only do one thing. It's going to fly over the rooftops and just, the helicopter, and it's just going to start dumping dollars all over people. People are going to get mad, and they're going to say, we don't need all these damn dollars. So they're going to spend them collectively. But since output is always constant, right? We can't produce any more extra goods and services than we are now, and we can't produce any more extra goods and services in the future. It's always constant. Guess what happens? Inflation. Inflation. But this is all predicated on the belief that the central bank that the Federal Reserve controls the money supply when it doesn't, that the velocity of money, is constant. Output is constant, but it's all predicated on this notion that Friedman wanted us to believe that most people don't want extra money. And so they have to be forced to take it against their will. And if you want to accept that kind of nonsense so that you can believe inflation, and then you consider, inflation's our biggest fear. And so you can sit around and justify doing nothing. That's fine if you want to be that way, but I would prefer that you do something nice and productive. Take up a hobby like gardening or, I don't know, knitting or watching reality TV, maybe Walking Dead, and stay out of the national debate and stay off of social media with economics, because you're making it very hard for poor people to recover. You're making it hard for us to end poverty when we can easily do it tomorrow. You know?
This dipshit brought up Weimar Republic. Oh my God. Okay, we're moving on. We can't even deal with him. That's a sign of someone that is literally not worth addressing anymore.
That's the sign of a person that doesn't understand that you buy food with money. That's a person that doesn't understand that.
Productive capacity had been decimated.
Yeah.
Germany's productive capacity.
Well, first of all, Weimar had lost the war, and Belgium and France put the Versailles Treaty on them, so really hamstrung them there, and they said they got to pay the debt in gold. Well, they ran out of gold, so you know what France and Belgium did? They come into the Ruhr Valley there, and they seize their industrial sector. And they don't let them produce goods and services, you know. So the workers, they go and say, screw it, we're not working. But the government continues to pay them. So there's no output to match the government spending. So they already have a supply problem. Next thing you know, at the end, the exports collapse. What the hell do you want from these people? The government spending could not result in increased output. Guess what happens? Inflation. Okay? It's not just the spending. And the Federal Reserve is not going to create hyperinflation because it doesn't conduct fiscal policy. It conducts monetary policy, which leads us back to the original. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
The amount of ignorance that we have to face just to get to where we can save some fucking lives is unbelievable. The amount of bullshit ignorance that we have to get through just to get to single payer. Forget the Republicans. The Republicans, we can't even worry about the Republicans. They're so far over. They're so far not in our. We got to deal with progressives who are just too cool for school, who don't know their ass from their elbow, who are literally cock blocking progress. And because they're so steeped in idiocy and Alex Jones-minded garbage, because they just can't stand the idea of people living, because they are so hell-bent on creating misery and putting absolute shithole on us that I don't even know what the hell, when I say I'm a progressive, I know what I'm doing. I'm fighting for progress. I'm fighting for people to live. I'm fighting for people to have a better life. I want to end wars. I want to give single payer. I want to fix the energy grid. I want to go to green energy. These fucksticks literally would rather sit there and screw with something and literally eradicate any ability to do any of this stuff, and that makes them murderers by proxy. I have no respect for them whatsoever. Zip.
What I say is they just collect political issues, and they don't want to see the men because it would make their life meaningless. They wouldn't know what to do with themselves. But using a thing like the Fed is a private bank and we have to end it. What needs to be understood, again, is that the Fed has public and private characteristics. The Board of Governors in Washington, D.C. is a federal agency, okay? The New York Fed, the Minneapolis Fed, the St. Louis Fed, these are not government agencies, okay? But then again, if you want to have a banking system and you want your payments to clear when you buy things from Walmart, you go and buy your groceries, okay, you have to have the central bank in place there. Now you say, oh, well, blah, 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 it's private and it's going to kill us all and it's bankrupting us. This is not true. It's not true. It has public-private characteristics. But you see, the thing is, it does not control fiscal policy. U.S. Treasury does. Congress does. It can only cooperate. And guess what? Treasury cooperates with monetary policy. It issues bonds. That's what Treasury bonds are for. The Fed uses them to defend a target rate that it sets. And here's the big thing. Please try and understand. If you are going to rely exclusively or almost exclusively on monetary policy, then you're going to expect the Treasury to be issuing bonds because the Fed, even though it doesn't really need them, it could just pay interest on reserves. Congress wants them. If we're going to deficit spend, Congress wants bonds issued. Okay, well, that's a political thing. Don't mistake the political thing for operational reality. The reason why Treasury issues bonds is so the Federal Reserve can pick them up through open market operations and use them to defend a particular target interest rate. Why? Because we're relying on a target interest rate. We're relying on monetary policy. If you don't want to rely on monetary policy and you want to stop issuing bonds, it's real simple. You maintain a 0% interest rate policy so that the overnight rate, when it falls, it doesn't matter. It just falls straight to the floor, so what? It doesn't need to be defended because it's 0% interest rate, right? Then you can stop issuing bonds because Treasury or because the Federal Reserve won't have to get its hands on them to drain away excess reserves when the competition pushes the overnight rate down. It won't have to defend its target rate, so it doesn't need bonds to drain reserves. It doesn't need to pay interest on reserves. It doesn't need to do anything. It just sit there and make sure the fucking payment's clear. Now you got a neutered Fed, and what are you going to say? End the Fed for what? Again, I want to make it point very clear, Steve. FDA, Barack Obama appointed a Monsanto vice president, the vice president of Monsanto now, to be the food czar. Where were all of these end the FDA people? What happened? I didn't hear anything about end the FDA. But I hear that end the Fed, end the Fed, end the Fed. Do you know why it's not end? Yeah, and you don't want to end the FDA because that's a different thing. See, that's different. That's just different. It's the FDA really doesn't. I don't know, but the Fed has the money. It has the money, and I love money, and we all need money, and the Fed's controlling it, and we're all going to die. This is just stupid. Congress controls the U.S. dollar. All spending begins in the House. The Congress does not check all these bills. I want you to go check all the spending bills since 1970 and go see if it says anywhere where this bill authorizes Congress to contact the Federal Reserve and borrow money from the Fed. It doesn't say anything like that.
This is my final point as far, because I know we're up against the time here, but as far as our discussion yesterday that led to this conversation goes, I had talked to you and I said, money has a natural helium effect. And I said, it kind of just always rises. So when you have a limited money supply and money always goes up to the rentier class, it always goes to the capitalist because it has a natural helium effect. You said, I think what you're looking to say is money pools.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about, well, why didn't, you limit the supply. Now all of a sudden you and I are like, sir, can I please have a loaf of bread, sir? Sir, please. Get away from me, peasant. And they don't need to spend because, my God, they don't need to. People are begging for food. They don't care. So these people are so, it just infuriates me that we even have to deal with them. Quite frankly, this is one of those wastes of space that has caused me so much heartburn because I want to save people's lives and all they want to do is kill people. They are fucking murderers by proxy. No effing joke. That is what they do. That's who they are. And that is where we're at right now. Because you can't have single-payer health care if you do this dipshittery. You cannot have investments enough to completely take over the green energy for this nation. We could do that today. But these people, end the Fed, fuck the environment, let's all die. I'm sick. I'm so over this moronic bullshit. Thank you for joining us tonight, Ellis. So I'll give you the last word, my friend. Last word on the Fed.
If you're not going to deficit spend, okay, like you were talking about, if you're not going to deficit spend, it's going to pool money is going to pool in certain areas like a dead body does. When a body dies, whatever end is laying on the ground, whatever gravity is going to pull the blood down, and that's going to be that. Same thing with the economy. If you don't deficit spend, and what's going to happen is eventually money is going to be spent, and then it's going to stop being spent, as people say. It's going to pool in certain areas, and they're not going to spend, and spending is going to go down and down and down and down and down until the government adds more dollars. That's just the way it is. The Fed is not the entity that adds more dollars. Okay, I don't care what Richard Warner says. I just don't care. I don't care what TV says. I don't care what books tell you. Congress authorizes spending. It manufactures the dollars when it sets a budget. And then those dollars are injected into the economy through fiscal policy. That is not the realm of the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve can only stand by to ensure the payment's clear, and it cannot tell Congress no. When it comes to monetary policy, the Fed is independent because it's setting a target interest rate and it's managing bank lending. Why would it do that? Because it's a bank. It's a central bank. And you've got commercial banks attached to it that create a system of banks for bank lending. Bank lending is not the realm of Congress. Congress does not lend you dollars, does it? Does it come to you and say, oh, you deserve a tax refund? It's not called a tax lend. It's a tax refund. It gives you dollars back, credits your account and gives you actual dollars. The Federal Reserve deals with bank lending. Different story entirely. And the dollars that it injects into reserve accounts when it's defending this target rate and conducting monetary policy and standing ready to make sure that the payment system doesn't collapse, those dollars don't leak into the economy. They don't get let out of the economy. They sit on a spreadsheet at the Federal Reserve and they never leave. Okay? You're confusing fiscal with monetary policy. You can end the Fed, fine, but that's so low. You're worried about the corruption at the Fed. Well, Congress. You're worried about the corruption at the president. You voted for this, okay? So the thing is, there's corruption in Congress. There's corruption in the White House. There's corruption at the Fed. There's corruption at the FDA. But all we hear is end the Fed, end the Fed, end the Fed. Now let's just be realistic. It's just a fetish. It's a fetish so that you can add a new political issue to your pet collection, so that you never have to get anything done and you can feel like you're doing something and have a cause. Okay? And a rebel without a cause. Oh, now I have one. End the Fed. It's just stupid when you've got people starving to death and all that is required is for Congress to authorize the spending, create a job guarantee, universal health care, green energy, fund a new power grid based on solar. It can all be done like that because Congress just authorizes the spending and it's done, and the Fed will say yes, sir, and it will credit all the accounts. It'll make sure that when it credits, it'll make sure that all the payments will clear. That's all it is. It's not the Fed loaning anybody money or anything else. And notice also that on the face of a Federal Reserve note, the signature of the Secretary of the U.S. Treasury is on that. And I will also note that this major, big private bank, there's two things before I'm going to leave. This major private bank you talk about, this big private bank that's got the government at its knees, number one, can't print its own Federal Reserve notes. The U.S. Treasury's Bureau of Engraving and Printing prints Federal Reserve notes. And two, the Federal Reserve every year returns profits to the U.S. Treasury. Last year, $92 or $96 billion. Okay? That's a strange business model for a private bank, to give profits back to its customer. Why would it do that? It's very strange. Oh, and three, the shares in the Federal Reserve, they're not corporate shares, they're savings accounts. The reason why you don't know this is because you don't understand central banking or bank operations. And it's best that you learn rather than saying, creature from Jekyll Island, creature from Jekyll Island. Ah! Creature from Jekyll Island! Ah! I mean, Stop parroting bullshit. Actually learn this stuff. Central banking's a real thing, you know, and it's complex and it's quite interesting too. And if you learned it, you'd find out that Warren Mosler will tell you, Steve. Go ask him. He had a bank. Go ask him. It's a savings account. The share's a savings account. It's nothing more than a savings account. It's not a corporate share. It's a savings account. What the shit? What the hell is a savings account? You know, I own a share of Apple. That doesn't mean I have a savings account. Okay, I still have a savings account. Okay, it's just stupid. This whole thing is just ignorant.
Real quickly, I owe Rob one question that you just played into. What is the role of the Treasury, and how does the Treasury get communicated to?
Communication between the Fed and the Treasury? It's constant.
The Treasury. Where does the Treasury fit in this mix?
Treasury is the one that conducts the fiscal policy for the U.S. Congress. Congress sets a budget, President signs it, Treasury begins crediting accounts. It begins dispersing the money that's created, hence Treasury. If Congress says, let there be $4 trillion this year in new spending, in deficit spending, we're going to have a deficit of $4 trillion. Once the President says, okay, October 1st, guess what the Treasury does? It begins dispersing those brand new $4 trillion. The Fed just makes sure that the payment's clear. Because when it deficit spends, the reserves will rise because the Fed will inject the reserves necessary to make sure that the payment's clear. So that when Steve uses part of that $4 trillion to go buy some food, swipes his debit card, the payment will clear.
You know, this is the worst thing ever, Ellis, and I'm going to let you go, but I want you to hear this. Okay. After all that talk, after you already explained, this jack comes in, says, it's going to devalue our dollar. Don't even address it. It's not even worth doing.
I don't have to. That's last Sunday's show.
Exactly. Guys, if you really give a shit about this stuff, we're not going to cater to that nonsense anymore. On our YouTube channel, you can go show by show by show, watch the whole damn thing over and over and over again. Yeah. Last week we talked about this whole bullshit of devaluing the dollar. Get out of your gold standard nonsense. It's a horrible fetish. It looks bad on you. It doesn't look good. It's like that old 1980s hairdo you still want to wear. It's not a good look. Lay off the gold. With that, Ellis, thank you so much for the special opportunity. Everybody have a good night. Have a good one. We're out of here.